This is Mark Mullinax, and I welcome you back to Power for the Peaceful, a podcast and class on Taoism. Today, verse 20, Coming to Our Senses.
When you listen to the ground and you put your roots down, you can hear what she says if you're listening. When you listen to the ground and you put your roots down, you can hear what she says if you're listening. The sweet sound of the river as she moves over the stones. The same song that the blood in your body sings as it weaves around your bones. When you're listening, are you listening?
There's a thread you follow. It goes among things that change, but it doesn't change. People wonder about what you are pursuing. You have to explain about the thread, but it is hard for others to see. While you hold it, you can't get lost. Tragedies happen, people get hurt or die, and you suffer and get old. Nothing you do can stop time's unfolding. You don't ever let go of the thread. The Way It Is by William Stafford.
Welcome back, my fellow seekers of the way things are, or Tao. Just one short announcement first. After every 10 verses, I put the regular podcast on pause for 1 week. So next week, I'll be doing a bonus episode, this time on the divergent ways Taoism is seen philosophically, like in our Tao Te Ching text, and how Taoism is actually practiced today. It will not be a comprehensive survey of Taoism in practice, but an introduction from which you may want to learn more on your own. Today's verse is an object lesson about forgetfulness of what we've seen before, losing our treasure and settling for less. The verse actually seems to be written in real time. It's a record of what actually takes place in a crowd of partiers. Now, being in a crowd can be terrifying. In a crowd, one can feel overlooked, hidden, incognito, and feeling so out of place. I give thanks today for my quote reader, my dear friend and pastor, Missy Harris. Here is verse 20 for this week, which I've entitled in my translation as Know Where to Turn. Spend no more time crazy thinking about useless, never-ending nonsense. You know, those infinitesimally subtle differences between yes and yeah, or artificial lines in the sand between good and evil. Why should I be colonized by others' dread? Where does such a path end? I watch the multitudes lustily pursuing their merrymaking feast, or ascend to a high place from which to view the spring festival. Alas, I alone seem inert, oblivious, essentially a baby who has not yet learned to smile. I am disconsolate and desolate, belonging nowhere. But the multitudes seek to spend their surplus, even as I appear as a loner with nothing. My heart-mind is that of a simpleton. What mind I have is confused indeed. Ordinary people seem to act purposefully, but my obstinate and thick-headed mind is all I know. They appear savvy, yet I feel muddled, like flotsam adrift on the sea. I have no place or refuge in their efficient, convenient world. Because I cherish sustenance only from our great Mother Tao, I feel my utter difference from others. So this verse begins with a warning. Verses 17, 18, and 19 have been repetitions that we are royally born. And to forget this, even in the tiniest of ways, begins a long road of decline caused by misremembering who we are, and the compromises and the deals with the devil we then engage in. Instead, our text teaches we have all this supreme goodness shared among us, and we are at our best selves when we remember and then practice this goodness. So verse 20 begins with a warning against this crazy thinking. but we all do it. We get into repetitive, obsessive thought syndromes about plans that may or may not go our way, whatever that is. Or, as someone close to me frames their crazy thinking, waking up early and solving the world's problems. Or obsessing about a loved one such that your obsessing actually gets in the way of your loving them. That never-ending nonsense that we somehow allow into our brain, which causes forgetfulness, that colonizes our will, wisdom, and judgment to strange and dreadful ends. However, and this is a big however, this is not our source, our end, or our purpose. Forget this supreme virtue, and we began to mistrust ourselves and maybe place a severely misguided trust in others. You see, attempting to be cool or appear as an insider in a group, we start to begin to change our internal weather system. We become distant from our original goodness, purpose, and virtue. That weather system begins to cloud our judgment and even create a kind of climate change within ourselves. Like a chameleon, we change our colors in order to blend in. Our thinking, feeling, aspirations, and even our moral compass bends towards blending in. The weather inside worsens. A mental storm is not too graphic an image, and this can lead to forgetfulness of who we actually are. You see, mental storms, like a hurricane over a warm ocean, can grow strong enough to disable and freeze us completely. It's as if we suddenly cannot see anything in front of us. And few of us have that bandwidth to just interrupt ourselves and simply ask in the middle of a mental storm, whose thoughts occupy and preoccupy my brain and body? Whose fool am I to be hoodwinked by others' dread? Ah, where does such a path end? Well, it can end in drowning in neurotic fixations on artificial worries, which, if we're honest, have no shelf life. Is there any help? Is there a lifeline to grab onto to prevent my drowning? Spoiler alert, yes there is. That lifeline is the thread described in the poem at the top of this episode.
There's a thread you follow. It goes among things that change, but it doesn't change. People wonder about what you are pursuing. You have to explain about the thread, but it is hard for others to see. While you hold it, you can't get lost. Tragedies happen, people get hurt or die, and you suffer and get old. Nothing you do can stop time's unfolding. You don't ever let go of the thread.
After the verse begins the way it does with its warning, there is a scene change. It takes the questions of the first part of the verse and brings them out in an autobiographical story about how, when we are not grounded in Tao, how our lives can easily become a descent into hell, a hell created by other people. Maybe Jean-Paul Sartre was right when he quipped, "Hell is other people," in his philosophical play called No Exit. One finds oneself in a crowd, alone, inexperienced, like a boat in a storm, and you don't know how to get free. Forces call out to you to align with them. But like with huge ocean waves in a storm, you have no idea which waves are friendly and which are fatal. So you just grab onto one and surf, hoping for the best. Verse 20 describes his hell like this. You see multitudes lustily pursuing their merrymaking, but you see no sense or merit of it in any way. You feel alone. You seem inert, oblivious, like a bewildered baby, disconsolate, desolate, belonging nowhere. You feel like a loner, simple-minded, some confused person so out of place you wondered, how in the world did I get here? You feel compromised, alone, lonely, confused, no compass with which to navigate this social hell. Everyone seems to be in the spirit of the party, except you. And you cannot continue to lie to yourself that this is somehow home, because you feel like wreckage and a wreck. drifting debris and flotsam floating on a sea.
Our souls were telling us something was wrong. John Lewis.
This goes on like how long? Until you remember who you are. Maybe there's a break in your cloudy weather. Maybe another person in your life shows up. Maybe you're in nature and you get reminded. How could I forget that? My original nature is Tao. Tao flows through me like streams in a desert, bringing life, awareness, peace. And you realize you have forgotten. But oh, the time waste, the sucking of one's soul down into the endless expectations and useless use of others. You have compromised and settled for that which does not satisfy. Perhaps the controversial word prostitution is not too alien an idea here. We are made for more. We are made for better. So, my listeners, here's a strong autobiographical warning from an author who has temporary amnesia and allowed him or herself to descend into the depths of useless time and wasted energy. As long as one seeks to satisfy the crowd, the self will never, ever be at peace. But at last, our author remembers his or her real self, true origin, their authentic purpose, and original integrity. In touch with Tao and one's origins, how can playing to the crowd ever carry any more satisfaction? You know, every translation of this verse 20 ends with this statement of great truth and faith. I am different from all this. My home is in the great Tao, the great mother, because my source is greatness, and I come from a womb that gives birth only to greatness. Tao accompanies me always and forever. Because I cherish sustenance only from our great Mother Tao, I feel my utter difference from others.
When you're listening, are you listening? When you're listening, are you listening?
Few will have the greatness to bend history itself, but each of us can work to change a small portion of events. It is from numberless diverse acts of courage and belief that human history is shaped. Each time someone stands up for an ideal, or acts to improve the lot of others, or strikes out against injustice, they send forth a tiny ripple of hope, and crossing each other from a million different centers of energy and daring, those ripples build a current which can sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance. Robert F. Kennedy.
If there's a teaching in this verse 20, it is to develop the ability and skill to listen to one's inner voice speak, and actually speak from that inner voice. It's here that Tao teaches us something many do not seize upon. You see, the first person to whom one practices this care and compassion is with yourself. Get your compass right. Then you can lead others. On the airplane, get your oxygen mask on first, and then you can help others.
Be gentle with yourself. You are a child of the universe, no less than the trees and the stars. You have a right to be here. Desiderata.
Remember our first quote Missy read about the thread? Tao is that thread, the thread with which the universe is sewn together. We are on a constant, non-stop relationship with this thread, no matter when or where we are. Of course, we can all become comfy and cozy with falsehoods, with misconceiving reality. Our recent verses tell us that when we exchange our first best for a second best, or settle, the ramifications are deep and troubling, not just for us personally, but for society and world at large. Groupthink has never been good for the world.
If one does not keep pace with their companions, perhaps it is because they hear a different drummer. Let them step to the music which they hear, however measured or far away. Henry David Thoreau, Walden.
Societies and cultures create these in-groups and out-groups. Often people want to be in the in-group without thinking or awareness of what such social ordering does to our lives. Societies entice and seduce us to keep pace with their standards, and we often wear ourselves plumb out by adjusting to society's music rather than the music we hear within, however measured or far away. And as Thoreau went on to say, and I think he's right, to conform to an unjust system is to accept its abuse as a normal operational ideology. It is not our role as humans in a web of society to settle, going down a path that violates one's conscience, because there's this original goodness, original gold within us that does not die. Yes, there are hundreds of voices outside of us that tell us in hundreds of ways that we're no good or made for lesser things. But because there is original truth within us, just by being born of Tao, we each can be truth bearers. Don't let go of that thread. Because society will silence, try to discriminate against, and may even kill people to enforce its strange conformities. Society does make it harder for women, people of color, immigrants, and sexually diverse people. In millions of ways, society can make just being different financially expensive, legally costly, or seem obviously wrong. However, society still has no ultimate weapon to neutralize or to muzzle truth. For our societies have little to no idea about how the universe is constructed, or its processes, and its inherently sacred systems. All society has are mirages and screens that tend to have us look elsewhere than our original source for our sustenance.
When you're listening, are you listening? When you're listening, are you listening?
This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Harry Dixon Loess.
6 times this verse names the cost of losing sight of one's original nature and following the crowd. 6 times the phrase "I alone" appears, which names the huge psychic cost of losing touch with Tao. The cost of feeling this utter aloneness can result in us losing our way, our Tao, or as the opening poem by Stafford names it, letting go of the thread. One can and does feel that awful I alone aloneness of being at odds with the society that seems to be leaving you behind, except for one key thing. This feeling of I alone is also our refuge, our solution, for I alone is not just a feeling of alienation. We're never left alone. As the story of the prodigal son reports, the young man who had squandered his inheritance in riotous living and was living among and eating with the pigs he was hired to take care of, well, this young man, quote, came to himself, unquote. And when he came to his senses, he said,
How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare? But here I am dying of hunger.
Feeling utterly alone does not have to be fatal to one's soul. One can return to one's senses by remembering, recalling, coming back to your senses. Because we are made from another, prior, more basic energy for purposes other than to go along and to get along. We have a different timetable, a different calendar, a different everything than the pop culture. Societies will spin and respin and ever spin its wheels of fortune, looking for the wrong treasures. But we are the treasures. Just staying right with the supreme virtue, Tao, is exactly what any society is in need of today. Of course, as I'm reminded daily, it will get lonely.
Sometimes you need to sit lonely on the floor in a quiet room in order to hear your own voice and not let it drown in the noise of others. Charlotte Erickson.
Yes, it can get really lonely fighting the good fight. Yes, it can be overwhelming to keep on struggling for Tao's virtue in a world gone mad. Yes, it does get lonely to engage in radical acts that bring a remembrance of who we all are collectively. We feel this strong tug to join the crowds and festivals to which this verse refers, to merge or submerge oneself within a group, to regard oneself as less than or not qualified. We can feel as out of place as a baby by itself, a loner with nothing but a thick-headed mind, it seems like flotsam adrift on the sea. There seems to be no safe refuge. When all those popular people on social media work their resumes and egos into every popular endeavor, you can seem to be a misfit because you remember you operate by a different compass, calendar, and timepiece. But we can remember. We can let our light shine, for we hold onto the thread we heard about in our opening poem. We dance to a different music. As Mary Oliver reminds us in her poem, The Return,
And the rocks tumbled, and the earth shook, and the thread held.
when we remember and realign with our original nature Tao, we return to the most ancient root and most dynamic force of the universe. Anyone who believes or acts as if they are separated from Tao gives voice to the greatest of lies, that we are somehow inherently separated from the ultimate power or powers of the universe, whether you call that power love, God, justice, or whatever. Just to flirt with or to entertain that somehow someone is less than, or that someone else is more than, is not just plain wrong, but disastrous. And those who do create their own weather systems, storms whether mental or societal, their actions that they perpetuate are disastrous as well. So, I think the homework this time is obvious. What's your thread that's always been there? Can you name it and write it and post it in a conspicuous place? Or can you think of a book character or a movie character who finds a way to quieten their chaos and return to their senses? Write that character's name and post it somewhere conspicuous. And now to Missy's question.
How might our public education system be transformed if we practiced this verse with our children?
Missy, you tempt an educator to contribute constructively to a fraught, combative, and abiding dilemma. How do we practice quality education with underfunded schools and too many students per teacher? Now, we hear all the time about those hero teachers who go to the second and third mile in their own teaching practices, sacrificing their time and even fortune to make sure their students are heard and receive the custom-made education each child deserves. We celebrate these teachers, but do we then adopt their methods and models to educate every child? Education comes from the word in Latin educare, which means to bring out or to tease out the gifts of the student. But instead of bringing out our kids' uniqueness, our education system often assumes that sameness is what every kid needs. This cookie-cutter stamping of our young lives must stop. Are we preparing our young lives for the living out of their imaginations through an education that brings out their unique constellation of gifts, abilities, and interests? Or are we more invested in least common denominator programs, targeting mediocre achievement goals to produce interchangeable human beings doing interchangeable jobs and making the world resistant to good change by yet again a new generation of newly minted adults without the ability to think for themselves? Now, many schools are more industrial shills for late capitalist systems designed to train our students to become good workers, good consumers, and not much else. Where is the curriculum which does not cookie-cutter our kids into one-size-fits-all morsels on some conveyor belt valued for their lack of expertise to ask critical questions and to misfit? Our children need, first of all, to be heard by someone trained to help them ask the huge questions that their lives compel them to ask. That takes educators who takes each child with ultimate seriousness. Does this verse 20, you ask, have anything to offer? Yes. Instead of assigning grades that often turn into comparison contests and ranking systems of better than and worse than, we can, and I've seen it happen, offer custom-made educational experiences for students, and then evaluate students not with grades, but with custom-made conversations that highlight strengths and areas for growth. For when a young person is invested in and heard and seen and valued and recognized for her or his uniqueness, and then given tasks that actually challenges the student's creativity, thinking, and problem-solving abilities, I think we reduce the number of folks who go along to get along. We can actually reduce the need for flavor of the month educational initiatives that promise only better assessments, and at the same time increase our young people's resilience against groupthink, herdthink, self-censorship, mind colonization, and other conformist behaviors that passes for education today. Do you want students who can, on their own, able to come to their senses? Or do you want a society filled with people who do not know, deep down, what they actually want? So, keep investing in young people, one by one. Nothing we do for young people, someone once said, is ever wasted. This maxim works both ways. Do good for young ones, invest heavily in them, and society is repaid back many times over. Do bad by the young ones, or shortchange them, and society has to pay for their deficits again and again and again. I'm talking about mental health and time in the criminal justice system, among other things. Society is better served by a generation who knows they are valued and why, over against a generation who knows only how to kowtow and blend in. Our kids, like us all, are gold, so why treat them like machinable metal to be stamped, pressed, and lubricated for lives ever on repeat? If you're a parent, an educator, or involved with kids, next time you're with them, listen. Just shut up. Read your child like you read a book or read a room, and then you'll know exactly how to bring custom-made quality education without the groupthink, so that the despair of verse 20 is never their future or our legacy. This podcast remains an original labor of love, designed, written, and co-produced by many, whose central idea is that Tao Te Ching is good news for today. Tao still speaks. Missy Harris gave voice this week. Artist Audrey Davis drew. Molly Hartwell sings. Fortress Press keeps the copyright for quotations from my Tao Te Ching translation. My thanks to you for your attendance in this class on Taoism. May your days begin in peace and become the threads with which you weave your radical